Merry Christmas, y'all. Snoop Reviews here, and we're gonna take a change of pace today. We're gonna talk some Jojo. Yeah, so I've been meaning to talk about some Jojo for a bit. Feels like today would be a fun day to do something different. And we're gonna talk about not Jonathan, Joseph Joestar, Jonathan's grandson. And Joseph's my personal favorite Joestar that shows up pretty much the whole story. Like, yeah, Jotaro's cool. I really dig his story and a lot of the stuff that changes once Jotaro enters the fold. He's like pretty much everyone's favorite. But I like Joseph. I think he's really funny, clever, and they do a lot with his stories. It's cool because he kind of bridges the gap from Hamon to Stan's, and more so, he covers a broad variety of villains. You know, the other the other Joestars or Jojos down the line deal with a lot of villains and a lot of plots. Like, I mean, you get into the fourth one, Diamonds Unbreakable with Kira. It's way different from most of the other arcs, but they just kind of end there with those guys. Joseph really goes further in terms of overall story, and I just dig that. I really like Joseph, but yeah, let's get into it. And so we'll start off talking about battle tendencies. Joseph here, young Jojo. And so the fun thing about Joseph was right off the bat, he was pretty much good for a fight. They do some training and stuff like that, build him up, but for the most part, he was already ready, Hamon trained, pretty much without even trying. They say he was natural born. They say he was a natural born Hamon user, which is pretty crazy. He used it, I think when someone hijacked a plane he was on from the Speedwagon Foundation. He used it to take out those guys, and then he also uses it early on to save Smokey from the corrupt cops. He fires off, the Coca-Cola cap with Hamon and just shoots it rocketing and takes that dude's nose out, like jacks up his face. But anyways, he was a natural user at that. But his other great fighting prowess that you see early on is the wittiness he has in handling conversations. He's really good at prolonging these conversations or reading people, and he really plays with this prey. It kind of feels like he just toys with them, or he's really witted, really well witted. And definitely a huge fan of that. He's just got some clever lines. I love the whole bit where he's like, this is what you're gonna say next, and it's like, oh, how would you know what I'm gonna say next, whatever. And he just analyzes and breaks down what people are gonna do. Kind of, he's very smart. Well, before we get into talking about him fighting, let's cover some of the basic facts. So Joseph Joestar is the second Joestar in the Jojo lineage that really starts playing into the Hamon, the Stans, all that stuff. Starts talking about the checkered lives of Jojos and how they intertwine with Dio and other overarching plots. Because a big issue with the Jojos seem to be having light issues. Big issue with the Jojos is a lot of them die young, and they're constantly in these tragic situations. Where that stems out of mostly is Dio. So one of the first things they will have if you're a Jojo is you get this star on your shoulder, and that means you're a Jojo. I mean, Holly has it, and she's Holly Cujo. She's not a Jojo. She's Joseph's daughter, but since she's from that lineage, she carries on the star, just the same as Jotaro Kujo, who's an actual Jojo in terms of name. But then Joseph is also the grandfather of, Jotaro Kujo, and then the father of Josuke, what is their last name? It's like Higiwama or something like that. Josuke Higashikata, and that's Joseph's son. Actual son, so it would be Holly's little brother. And apparently that happens during part 3, somewhere after, or before or after, I can't even remember. I think it's before. Like 4 years before, he must have been in Japan and hooked up with this lady, knocked her up, cheated on his wife, Suzy Q, who we'll get into in a little bit. And there we go, we have Josuke. And so he's aired 2 different Jojos in a sense, and he himself plays a big part in 2 of the arcs. He's in 3, but I will say he only shows up really as a pertinent character in 2. Because other than that, he's kind of more of a tag back to the older arcs and kind of tying in the new Josuke that is, and his actual part, and kind of linking him and Jotaro up. But he is one of the more proficient and longer lasting. He is one of the oldest. Him and Holly have the longest lifespans as actual JoJos from the from the Joestar family line. But other than that, Jotaro shows up a bit more because he shows up in what is it, the Concrete Prison. I haven't read that one yet, but that's Jotaro's daughter, Jolene. But Jotaro shows up there, but Joseph doesn't. So, enough talking about Jotaro and his family lines. I guess technically he's related to Dio, because Dio cuts his head off and takes over Jonathan's body. So in a sense, they're kind of related that way. That's how the whole stand thing comes about. But we first get introduced to Joseph and Battle Tendencies. And Battle Tendencies is actually probably one of my favorite arcs. I really enjoyed Stardust Crusaders, but there's kind of a lull to me in sections with stand users where it just feels like, hey, let's get to the actual grid of the story. Where Battle Tendencies feels like it was constantly evolving and building this overarching story really quickly with a variety of villains. So you start off with seeing Joseph meet Smokey and saving him from the corrupt cops. Then he is introduced to Straitso, and Straitso is coming off of this high of being a Hamon user for all these years, and he's starting to feel his age catch up to him, and it's frustrating to him because he feels like he has so much more to go. And he spent all these years with Joseph's father, Jonathan, and Robert E.O. Speedwagon, traveling and fighting and trying to better the world. And he feels like he's losing out, that he deserves to live longer. And he reflects upon remembering Dio Brando using the stone mask to turn himself into a vampire and gain immortality. And over these years, he's thought and dwelled on it. And he starts to kind of relate with Dio. He wants that power. He feels like he deserves it. So he gets a little bloated. And while this is going on, Joseph gets entangled in this. And he, I believe, comes there to take out Joseph because Joseph's one of the only Hamon users strong enough to take him out. And they end up fighting it out. And Joseph takes out Straitsu in quite the fashion. He uses a Tommy gun and shoots in the whole front of a storefront that Straitsu was at. Gets him out, and then he manages to get a crap ton of grenades all over him. All over Straitsu during their fight. And blows him up, and then uses Hamon to, wipe him out. And he talks about how there's a bigger villain to worry about, that the Nazis have someone. This takes place in the 40s during World War II. And so Joseph goes to investigate, and that's where they're introduced to Santana. Santana is what is called a Pillar Man. The Pillar Men there's I think 5 of them. No, 4 in total, because it's AC/DC, WAMU, and then what's the last one? God. Oh, Cars. And 4 with Santana. And so the Nazis are investigating and playing with Santana, trying to figure out what he is, what they can pull from him to strengthen their war and maybe find immortality. So Joseph busts into the scene, and Caesar's not with him at this point, I don't believe. And so he busts into the scene and meets Strauenheim. Oh, and I think Smokey's tagging along at this point. And Robert E.O. Speedwagon, who was thought to have been killed by Straitsu, who actually managed to live from a major not concussion, but I think the Nazis saved him, but he had a huge crack to his skull. They managed to save his life. They're trying to use him to get information in his foundation to unravel what the Pillar Men do and what they're capable of and what they can extract from it to build up their military power. Well, long story short, Joseph wins by a hair of his ass, and between him and Strongheim, they manage to get the Pillar Man caught in sunlight, and like a vampire, he gets just torched, just flames up, and no, he doesn't torch or flame up. He turns to stone again. He turns to a pillar again, and he can't move. And so they learn that like UV light is the only way they can contain these creatures. They can't really kill them. And with that, Santana, I think he lets on that there's other Pillar Men, that this isn't the only one, or no, it might have been Strongheim who told him that the Nazis had found other ones in Europe where these Pillar Men had lived. So Joseph, all right, tag out. We're heading over there. We gotta go fix this and figure out the issues. And on his way there, he is introduced to Lisa. And before Lisa, he runs into Caesar, and Caesar is someone who's kind of wooing women with his extravagant abilities, because he's a Hamon user. Caesar is actually a Zeppeli, and Zeppelis are well known in the Hamon world because that's who Jonathan learned Hamon from, and he's been a Hamon master who died in Jonathan's wake of battles and trying to die to help fight off Dio. So we meet I think it's Baron Zeppeli's great grandson, and that's just his great grandson. But that's Caesar Zeppeli, and Caesar is a definite big fan favorite, which is funny because I don't feel like Joseph gets a lot of respect, but people love Caesar. But they end up kind of fighting it out. They have this rivalry against each other because of their ideals. Caesar, one, has this big respect for family, and he feels like his family's been stepped on by the Joestars, kind of. And he's also dealt with great loss from Pillar Men. Where Joseph, on the other hand, feels like he doesn't hold his ancestors that dear that he's willing to hold on to feuds and fights and risk his life over something so melodramatic as that. But they learn to kind of coerce each other into being better Hamon users, and they end up becoming good friends, and they train under Lisa to become better Hamon users. Because after they meet the Pillar Men, so Wamu and Cars just are like, can't be bothered. And AC/DC is like, I'm alive, I want to play around and see what these Hamon users are capable of in this day and age. That's where we kind of learn that the Hamon users and the Pillar Men have been fighting this ongoing battle for thousands and thousands of years, because it's like every 2,000 years the Pillar Men awake again and they rule over the land, and then something obstructs them, either Hamon users or something or another. But they found their cure. They're going to go get the Stone of Aja, and they're going to become immortal. And so AC/DC kind of shows the gap in power between the Pillar Men and where they're at versus the Hamon users that are Caesar and Joseph at this point. So Joseph and Caesar realize they have to go and train because they've been put on these restrictions. They put 2 poisonous rings in Joseph's body, and they give him like 2 weeks to train and try and become a worthy warrior, because they're all about warriors fights. They're very like classic Mayan or something like that, dying in a battle, and they live for battles worthy of killing them or them killing another person. They other than that, they just drain people. They don't care, but they want to find a challenging battle. So Joseph and Caesar go on this hardcore training with Lisa to become strong enough. They end up fighting AC/DC and Wamu, and they manage to remove one of Joseph's poison rings because AC/DC attacks Joseph and Caesar while they're passing their training with Lisa. And then they go to track down the other 2 Pillar Men, and they run into Wamu and Cars, but Cars is held up high in this castle. And I forget how they got it. They got the Stone of Aja from Lisa somehow. I think they manipulated some girl or something like that, but they got the trinket stolen from her. Nonetheless, Joseph and Caesar head off to go take on and try and get back the Stone of Aja and stop the Pillar Men. And, you know, Caesar had been going on and building up this whole point of his family had been trampled on by the Pillar Men, and he'd lost so much, and he had to defeat Wamu on his own, and that he had to get a vengeance for his father who died, because his father had been caught in the crossfire. Somehow he'd walked up and found one of the Pillar Men and died in front of Caesar without even knowing him, after Caesar had completely disrespected and disowned his father. It really changed Caesar and made him want to be a Hamon user and reprimand this situation. And yeah, Caesar goes and fights him out, and they have this really cool fight. You know, Caesar using his bubble Hamon, where he sends bubbles everywhere that he'd been working on to reflect light and transfer Hamon in these dangerous, explosive, floating bubbles. And Wamu, on the other hand, uses his really cool spin where he can make himself impervious to light, like light can't get through to him, so he's almost pretty much unstoppable. And they're both essentially using the same ability to fight each other, and just vice versa. Like, one's reflecting light and the other's trying to, you know, stop light from entering, touching his skin or anything. They have this really cool fight, but in the end, Caesar loses, and in a quite dramatic and touching way, he leaves a message for the Joseph and Lisa, and they empowered. Joseph goes and fights Wamu, completely destroys him, gets his cure for his other poison, so now he's off the hook, and he's ready to take out Cars. And so now Joseph, someone who, you know, didn't really hold on to vengeance and feuds, has a strong sense of it after losing Caesar. And so he has this big fight out. Luckily wins, like literally luck. And that's one thing, is Joseph is extremely lucky. I mean, all the Joestars are in some of their fights. It's just luck that they made it through, honestly. But the Cars fight really shouldn't have won. Cars had his ass beat in a lot of ways, and it was because of a volcanic eruption. It's not that Joseph didn't do some good stuff, but he pretty much blew Cars into space, and Cars floated off in space. But there's a lot of cool things that happen after. So we learn Lisa is Joseph's mother, and actually the adopted baby that was saved by, and not Susie Q, I forget what her name is, but Jonathan's wife. I'll have to look that up. Jonathan's wife manages to save when leaving the wreckage of the ship that Dio and Jonathan fought on. And so she was pregnant with with Jonathan the second, I think, but it's Jonathan's son. It was George the second, named after Jonathan's dad. But she had him. He wasn't a Hamon user, and he fought in World War II. He actually died because of the zombies from Dio Brando, who had made all these zombies back in the 1800s. A couple of them managed to get on the ship, and he fought and saved a bunch of people, killing them. That's where Lisa learned she wanted to become a Hamon user. She met with Straitso and then became a Hamon user very proficiently, and ended up becoming a trainer. And she was trying to train people to protect the Stone of Aja, and then also to build up people to fight against the Pillar Men or what have you. And or Dio also. She wanted to get vengeance on all the zombies that killed her father. So she separated herself a lot from Joseph. Irina. So Irina, Joseph's grandmother, or Irina, I can't even pronounce it, but she ended up raising Joseph with the wealth from the Speedwagon Foundation, and he never knew his mother, really. She was very protected by Irina. But they end up meeting, and she informs him that after having some weird kind of romantic interest from Joseph to her, even though she was 50 and his mother. But just more to the humor, I guess. But yeah, Joseph is thought to have been dead after the whole Cars fight, because he just got blown up with he wrecked a plane and then got blown up with a volcano blast. And so really don't blame anyone else for thinking he's dead. But he comes back a couple weeks later. He was nursed back by Susie Q. They end up dating. He thinks she's cute. She's kind of a ditz. And bam, wham, bam, they have Holly, and we move on to the third part of the Jojo franchise. Now, I will probably talk more about JoJo's, the third part, second parts, first parts, when I talk about other characters. But I'm not going to do it on a chapter by chapter or arc base or anything like that, or part. I'm just going to talk about the characters and we'll cover the story that way. But, so we'll be covering part 3 and part 4 a little bit today. But we got Joseph returning, it's like 30 years later. He's a well-established realtor in New York. He's a big hoss, making lots of money. Plus, the Speedwagon Foundation is constantly taking care of him. And he kind of runs a bunch of things. He's a very powerful dude in a sense. What the foundation, the Speedwagon Foundation, is allowed to do because of their money and because of how wealthy he is to begin off. He really has a lot of sway throughout their whole adventure in part 3. And it's not that they didn't. I mean, he traveled all over in part 2. I mean, most of Europe, a bunch of different places. And at this point in the story, he's been to a lot of the world. But it starts off with Joseph landing in Japan. He'd gotten called from Holly, who'd married a man out there and had a kid who was about 18, Jotaro. And Jotaro's dealing with these issues, and he doesn't know what's wrong with himself, so he put himself in a jail, and the jail essentially calls Holly and says, like, you gotta get him out of here. We can't just house him because he doesn't want to be outside. Like, he hasn't really committed crimes other than beating the prisoners and stuff like that. And Holly thinks he killed someone, so she goes running over there and she needs to talk to him. And she's like, he's really a nice boy. And Joseph's just like, or not Joseph, Jotaro's just like, shut up. He says some naughty words and is very rude to his mother, but definitely as a hilarious quirk. But Joseph ends up coming to help Holly and figure out what's wrong because she knows her dad's strong man and knows kind of about their lineage. I don't think she knows much about the Hamon and all that stuff, but she trusts in her dad. She knows he can probably fix it. So Joseph lands in and he brought Abdval. God, why am I struggling to pronounce his name? I've said it many a time. But anyways, Abdval, and he comes, and Joseph has an inkling that he's going to be a stand user, because what happens at the beginning of this part is Dio is come back. He was staying in a coffin that got brought up from the sea 100 years later, and he kills all the people on the ship, and he now has Joseph's body, and because of that, it causes a strange shift, because somehow I think Dio is shot with the arrow that gets talked about later in part 4 and part 5, the bow and arrow that turns people into stand users. But because of their blood relation to Joseph, or Jonathan, God, the JoJo's are already getting me confused. I'm only talking about like 3 of them today. But because of Jonathan, Joseph and Jotaro and Holly have all manifested their own stands. Because I think after you become stand users, your generations just start inheriting it. But also Josuke inherits it because he was born 4 years after, before what happens in part 3. And so he develops stand powers and he gets really sick and almost dies. But regardless, Joseph has what's called the Purple Hermit stand, which is a very unique and specific, kind of creative stand. He gets a lot of abilities out of it, really. He's not really powerful. Like, all he gives him is more acrobatic and movement and kind of binds. Like, he can tie people up with the vines from Purple Hermit. He can swing with them. And the other ability he gets is he can see parts of the future in certain ways. Like, either he can break a camera and that will print out a picture of something to come in the future, or he can use televisions to like kind of track in and hear conversations that are happening soon or are happening currently in other parts of the world, whatever it's pertaining to. So Purple Hermit actually has a lot of powerful abilities. They also use Purple Hermit to find out about I think Dio's son, Jojo Brando. I forget his last name. Giorgio Giovanni, yeah. And That's how they find out about him. But Purple Hermit, definitely a unique stand ability. Not the most best in fighting prowess, but with Joseph, as smart as he is and the ingenuity he uses with it, he manages to do a lot with it. Remember, I mean, through all of part 3, he's hanging out with like 3 fighter classes: Abdval, Jotaro, and Polnareff. All have really strong fighter type stands. They're all more based around fighting up front and just brute damage. I mean, one of them casts flames and the other uses a sword, and then Jotaro's just uses his fist. Star Platinum is just all about punching and being precise. But Kakyoin, he is kind of like that, but it's more tactful, more leaning kind of like Joseph's. But Joseph definitely got the weaker of them and definitely gets a lot of use out of it. He makes more bank for his dollar. But yeah, Joseph lands in Japan and goes and meets with Jotaro. Introduce him to Abdval. Abdval fights a little with Joseph and shows him that it's just a stand power like he has. It's not a demon, that he can use it and become more in tune with it, and it's actually kind of a tool and something to rely on. And they begin their mission, and mostly throughout this arc, Joseph just plays a major supporting character, because the whole story stems out of Holly's getting sick because of her stand. She doesn't have the power to take care of it or use it. She's not capable to deal with it, and she's slowly dying. It's like 50 days they give her, and she's gonna die. So they head off to Egypt to go find Dio, who's trying to build up his power to the point where he becomes immortal again, and he can take on all the Joestars and then kill off any of his threats and become this big, indomitable leader, emperor type deal. So he's hiding out in Egypt. And the Joestars head out with their crew, and Joseph just kind of the brains helping him move and kind of helping mold Jotaro into the person that's gonna fight Dio. Same way Lisa did for him, and the same way that Baron Sapelli did for Jonathan. So he mostly just seems like a mentor in this part of the story, but he's really entertaining, funny, and his comedic relief throughout most of this plot or arc is really, really well done. And but yeah, he's more of a plot device in the story. And then we get to part 4. Now, part 4, a lot of people have flack with, because the reason I don't count him as a major character or really a main part of it is because, like I said, he's just really tying the story together. So, like I said earlier, Joseph got a little frisky while he was in Japan a couple years before the Dio incidents, and he hooked up with some lady out there who fell madly in love with him because he's super charismatic, even as a 60-year-old old man, or he was like 50 at the time, like 50-year-old man, but he's still swinging. And knocked her up. He didn't know. He left. Nobody told him. And 18 years down the line, they were looking through some documents, and they found ties that Joseph has a kid. Which, to Susie Q's chagrin, she was very pissed that he was playing funny while he was gone. And at this point, Joseph's just kind of senile. He hasn't been upping his training as a Hamon, which doesn't make you immortal, but lengthens your life. He hasn't been upping any of that. He hasn't been practicing. He's just been doing his thing, being a real estate agent, growing old with Susie. And he's gone kind of senile, and he doesn't really know what's going on. So Jotaro kind of takes it upon himself to help his grandpa out and go figure out the issue over in Japan, which is his home turf anyway. So he flies over back to Japan. At this point, Jotaro's a marine biologist, interestingly enough. Strongest stand user in the world, and also smartest marine biologist. But he heads over and he meets Josuke, and they talk, and he learns that Josuke's had a stand his whole life. He was born with it. Same way that Joseph was kind of born with Hamon, kind of transferred, where Araki's cutting out a lot of this building to get to the grit of the abilities. He just starts them off with it and then builds from there. But yeah, they kind of duke it out a little and learn about each other. And he informs him that he's Joseph's son. And Josuke doesn't really want a lot to do with him. He feels like, he was abandoned. He wasn't really recognized as a kid for Joseph ever. It's not really Joseph's fault. I mean, yes, he had the kid but he didn't know. The lady didn't tell him about it, didn't inform him. And not that she wouldn't have. I think there was just a miscommunication. I think these things just kind of happened quick. But they learn about it, and so Joseph wants to reprimand the situation. He wants to give him money and kind of learn what he can do to help out their situation. Josuke doesn't want anything to do with it. He's worried because his mom was so madly in love that she's just gonna, it's gonna destroy her to learn that she was a part of an affair and that he's not gonna be coming back to her just to bring it up. Jotaro doesn't give up. He also has issues there that, the Kira stuff that goes on in part 4, and then the overall issue with stands just popping up all over the town that the Higashikawa family are around. God, I'm struggling. And Jotaro hangs around. This ends up needing Joseph to come out there because they have to find a certain stand user, Red Hot Chili Peppers, because he took the bow and arrow that turns people into stand users, and they're gonna have Joseph fly out and use some of his abilities to figure it out. But he's really senile. He can't really protect himself. Most of the time, he doesn't know where he's at or where his cane's at. And Josuke isn't stoked about this. He doesn't want to meet his dad. He's like, no, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't feel like he's my dad. I'm ready to just move on. So they have really uncomfortable relations. They end up hanging out a little, and Josuke protects him, but by the end, he ends up respecting him kind of as a father, even though he's crazy. But Joseph, he tries. There's some parts where he breaks through his senile old manness and, does some stuff to save the day. Mostly it revolves around this invisible baby stand user just popped up. But he ends up adopting that baby too. Him and Suzy Q raise it, which she thought was another kid he may have had out there. But other than that, he just plays kind of the dopey, crazy old character in the background, just cutesy and stuff. And he's fine. It's just not what people wanted to see of Joseph at this point. It'd been better to kind of let him taper off, just add him in the footnotes as something to tie in like they did at the beginning, but bring him into the story just kind of made it sad. Like, I really love Joseph, and it was kind of sad to see him like that. But other than that, Joseph is top-notch stuff. He's really clever, quick-witted dude. Just so funny, but I didn't talk about some of the weapons he uses, so we'll go into that. We'll cover some of the extra stuff here now, I guess. But so Joseph is mostly known for using Ripple Hamon attacks, and he uses a lot similar to his grandfather Jonathan, which he uses Overdrive, which just sends a huge amount of ripple pulsing through someone, all the energy. It's like natural sun energy, kind of flying through a live object generally. And then he has Zoom Punch, which is also another Jonathan ability where you dislocate your shoulder, which sounds god awful, but it extends your reach of your punch with ripple in it. Then he has Ripple Overdrive, which is probably the most commonly used, but it sends a large amount of ripple into the whole arm of the user, and it can blast through a specific point, and it just explodes a lot of whatever it's hitting. That's how Jonathan uses a lot to fight. Because I think that's where Dio had to cut his head off the first time. Is like he punches him and it's going all the way up Dio's body, and so he just cuts his head off to end the cycle so the ripple can't continue. And that's, I think, how Ripple Overdrive handles. You got Ripple Beat, which is like a smaller version of that. He charges his hand and chops his opponent, and he can't hurt himself with this because it's all his own ripple ability. And then there's Ripple Hair. They use a lot of hair where they use them as needles, or he uses them in one case to build like a shield. He rips out a bunch of hair and puts Hamon into it, and because of that, all of like Santana's shots that he sent at Joseph just kind of get disrupted. So there's a couple different ripple abilities he uses. And I really was sad to see them step away from Hamon so much, because I thought it was an interesting ability and they could work it in with the stand users. But, you know, Araki had said that he mostly wanted to do 3 parts with the Hamon stuff and then move on to stand users in separate series, but he just kind of tied them all together and just left Hamon in the background, which is alright. But one of the things Joseph starts using while using Hamon, you know, they use objects they can put Hamon into, and one of them is the American clackers. He uses these ball clackers, which you just bounce like this, and the 2 balls just kind of bounce off each other, you know. And he uses it as like a boomerang. He has one where he volleys it like nunchucks. He's just flipping it around. Big issue with this is Joseph tended to hurt himself a lot with these, because he was proficient. He got really proficient at it, but just they're hard to control and they'll thwack you. He used a couple different objects, as I talked about earlier. Bottle cap. He could anything that's inanimate. You can pretty much power up with ripple and shoot at someone. You know, it gives him kind of a free control. He used a Tommy gun on Straight So, and he used hand grenades. Yarn off a wool hat he used to build this whole arena that him and Easy Deasy were fighting in, or AC/DC were fighting in, and I forget how he does it, but he manages to kill him with the pretty much the yarn. And yeah, he used a sledgehammer in a race against Wamu, because they have a really kick-ass chariot race. Then he uses his stand, which is Purple Hermit. And really, there's not a lot of fighting ability in that, other than you can entangle him with a bunch of roots and stuff. But yeah, he's extremely acrobatic, as I talked about earlier. Most of JoJo's are. I mean, God, have you seen the stances those guys will take? Just like leaning, talking to you. But he's definitely, Purple Hermit increased that. And other than that, his big weapon is, his impressive wit and trickery, which they talk about here in the fandom. And a huge chunk of how Jojo gets through his fights is his secret technique, which is Jotaro has used actually, but his secret technique is where he runs away and pretty much looks like he's giving up on the fight, and so the villain either is forced to chase him or waits because they don't feel like they should be bothered with chasing someone. But it's not as cowardice as it seems. Joseph is running and trying to figure out a way to survive and work in a new plan to take out the person he's fighting. He doesn't really give up that quick. Big thing about Joseph, though, that I think people give flack, but a lot of people also like, is he's not a quitter. And by not being a quitter, he's willing to do some dirty stuff. Jojo is accurate too, but Joseph has definitely used a fair share of dirty tricks in fights. He'll lie to people, he'll kick you in the balls, throw rocks at you, beg for his life, act like he's, you know, on the verge of giving up, and totally deceive you. But hell, he's the only JoJo that's lived this long, right? Damn straight, man. Joseph is the man. Just something different. I don't know how great this was. I just wanted to talk about him, so let me know what you guys think. But yeah, Joseph Joestar. We'll probably talk about other ones. I'll title it something different at some point. Maybe I'll reflect back on Joseph once I have a system, but we're just gonna call this the, you know, JoJo's Bizarre Christmas. And yeah, leave it at that. Enjoy your Christmas. Have a good New Year. I mean, I'll be posting between then and streaming, but yeah. Merry Christmas. Ciao, ciao!